Hello. Thank you for attending. I will be done talking in about a minute, then I'm going to hand everything over to Andrew, but I just wanted to introduce Andrew. He is a co-founder and data scientist, and he he co-founded Evolve, which is a tech company that is currently working in pharma to help with the COVID-19 research, probably along with a lot of other projects that they're doing. Um, and just a couple reminders, if you're not talking or you have background noise, just try and mute yourself as much as possible just so everyone can hear the speaker clearly or Andrew clearly. And with that being said, I'm just going to hand everything over to Andrew. I'm really excited to hear um, your story again. It's really interesting, and then as well as everything that y'all are doing in Evolve.
Great. Thanks, Raphael. And thanks for having me. And thanks, everyone, for joining to listen to my diatribe and silly anecdotes. So as Raphael said, my name's Andrew Satz, which you can probably see in the corner here, right? Oh, sorry, that way. Yeah, for me, it's here. So for you guys, here. I do want to, just a couple things in advance of me talking. First of all, if you have any questions throughout, I'll try to answer as many questions as I can throughout the discussion. I'll consider it more of a discussion because I'm going to try to answer the questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. I'll pay attention to them, and I'll try to answer them as they come up. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question to the group, just feel free to send it to me. There is only one stupid question. That's the question that you don't ask. So that's the only stupid question. The other thing is that there may be things that I say that come from a certain perspective. And so if they don't apply to you, you can just ignore them. But in general, I'm going to just try to tell you guys my story and tell you what we're doing at Evolve. So, Raphael asked me to share how I actually got into data science. And so I'll tell that story first, and then I'll talk to you guys a little bit about more of our technology and more from a technical perspective. So how I got into data science. So in 2006, I was working as a risk manager during the day and in the insurance industry, and a nightclub DJ on the nights and weekends. And I was pretty successful at both of these things. So this is sort of like I had a sort of a very weird background. I like to say I was a less beat up, less rich version of Batman, one thing by day, one thing by night. But hey, I didn't wear a cowl and a cape, but hey, that would have been cool, right? So I was, for my work, I was at the airport, I was getting on a plane, and I didn't have anything to read. This was 2006, so this was the year before the iPhone came out. And I got this magazine. I don't remember if it was like Entrepreneur or Wired or something like that. And I remember reading this article about this professor from UCLA who was doing this thing called, I don't remember if they were saying it was AI or data science. In any case, one of the two. And he was hired by a Swiss or Swedish telecom to try to predict which customers were going to cancel their cell phone service. It's a very common problem today as a data science, but at the time it was not a common technical solution that's being built today, but at the time it's not a common solution. And I remember reading the article, and he, with something like 70-something% accuracy, could predict whether somebody was going to cancel their service, which is all interesting and like, yeah, whatever. I mean, like, who really gives a crap about that kind of stuff? What got me was the fact that he, with something like 90-something% accuracy, this was the part that got me, could figure out where someone was going to be at any given point during the day, which is kind of crazy, like 90-something% accuracy to figure out where somebody was. At the time, I was like, holy crap, like, that's crazy. Now, in hindsight, I don't know what they meant, like, as a data scientist now, it's like, well, what metric did he use? Did he use an F1 measurement, or was he looking at the, like, which statistic was he measuring? At the time, I didn't know anything about it, right? So I didn't know how to question it, but I was like, holy cow, how the hell did he figure this out? Also, in hindsight, if you think about it, like, I mean, today is probably easier, but like 4 weeks ago, before the whole craziness that we're all going through right now happened, you were probably, if you had a 9-to-5 job, which I think most of the people in these countries had, where you are the hour before you go to work, assuming you're commuting, is probably the same. Where you are at work, it's probably the same. Where you are after work, like the hour after work when you're commuting, is probably the same. And what you're doing after that, like whether you're going to the gym or going home or things like that, it's probably pretty consistent. But at the time, I knew nothing about this stuff. I didn't have any way to think about these problems. I didn't have the tool set to think about how you would predict this kind of stuff. And so like, to me, it was awesome. So I started reading everything I could, but always from an applied perspective. Because I was not like, at that point, I didn't have an undergraduate degree. I had taken classes, but I hadn't, right? I didn't know statistics. I didn't know programming. I didn't know any of this stuff. But I did know about business. And so I kept reading everything that I could. How AI is being applied to garbage and this and that. And what I saw was, here I am in these two very different industries, insurance and music. You really can't get much different than those. Like, think about that. During the day, I'm in like wearing like a suit, not even wearing a tie. I was looking like a loser wearing like short sleeve shirt and a tie and like, you know, just, and at night I'm a nightclub DJ wearing fashion and at the parties and like, you know, playing music and doing all sorts of cool stuff. And I saw how this thing, AI, data science, whatever you call it, was affecting these very, very, very different industries. I was like, I got to learn as much as I can about it. So I started learning about all the applications, how it's being applied to music, how it's being applied to insurance, how it's being applied to city planning, how it's being, like, and I just kept learning the applications of it. At some point, I hit a wall and I realized if I really want to be not some dude who's like knows the sort of, no offense to any consultants in here, but like consultant view of AI and data scientists, I really needed to know programming and statistics, linear algebra, mathematics, all the different things. And I taught myself how to code. And then I went and I was in school and I was learning about behavioral economics, which in that space, I was really thinking about how do you sort of predict behaviors, because there's a lot of stuff with Bayesian statistics and sort of predicting things that are happening. I really wanted to learn about that, but at the same time, I was taking classes in coding and statistics and machine learning and linear algebra and all the different things that we really need to know to be effective data scientists, right? So they have that sort of, if you guys have seen those Venn diagrams, what makes a good data scientist, it's like statistics and math, if you consider statistics and math to be in the same vein, which I don't, but let's just say that they are, and then programming, and then it's like some business knowledge. I was heavy on this part. I was very weak on these parts. So I was learning as much as I could. I went and got a master's degree in data science. And actually the reason I got a master's degree in data science was in some part having to do with being able to learn the technical skills, but more importantly, it was to get the network. I wanted a network of data scientists because I knew I was never going to be the best statistician. I knew I was never going to be the best programmer or algorithm designer or whatever. But having the resources to be able to talk to people about these challenges, being able to say, hey, listen, I don't know enough about divergences. If you guys know what divergences are, if you guys learn anything about divergence, divergence is the distance between two distributions. In general, that's what it means. It's like, as opposed to distance, it's a divergence. I don't know enough about divergences. I really wanted to learn more about, like, I don't. And so when I have challenges for my own company where I don't know how to do something, I have resources that I can call and talk to about them. So that's my story of how I got into data science. Now, before I move on, and by the way, most of the data scientists I know have some crazy stories about how they got into it. Mine is not unique. I interviewed at 2 Sigma, which I'm not sure if you guys know 2 Sigma. It's sort of like, if you think about like, most companies are like there's some brand of this, so like finance or pharma or you know, city, and then they put technology on top of it. And so they're like, you know, a finance company doing with technology as part of it. Like it's like the IT department, which is what you really want to avoid. Then there's the other company where it's technology companies that do the finance and the information and things like that. So in the old day, the way that I would think about this, and the best way I could think about it is Google, right? So like you had a library that had a technology to search for to search, as opposed to Google, which is a technology company that's basically a library, right? Provide you all the information you could. Right? So Two Sigma is that, but they're a hedge fund. So they're super smart. Like the smartest data scientist I know works for Two Sigma. And so when I was interviewing with them, and I was told the story, like I was telling people like what my background is, this one guy was like, yeah, I had a rock and roll band, and I was touring the world and studying statistics, and right at the same time. Like he was on tour in a van doing that. So like the stories are very unique across the board of data scientists. It's not sort of like becoming a doctor, becoming a consultant, becoming a lawyer. It's very unique for our brand. There are people who take a very traditional route, whatever that means. But so before I move on into like what we're doing at Evolve, does anyone have any questions about the story? Cool. So now let me talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at Evolve. I'm going to type our name right here. That's actually how our name is written. It's all in capitals because if I wrote it like this, the Q does not look like an O. That's why our name is always written in capitals. There's another reason why our name is always written in capitals. So I'll explain to you our name, and then I'll get into the fact of what we do. So when we're working on, there are two major types of drugs. This is from a very 50,000-foot view, by the way. So if you're in the pharma industry, you may have some criticism, but I'm just giving it for the general. There's small molecules, which are like chemicals. So you think about like aspirin or chemotherapies. And then there are biologics, which are drugs that come from living things. Insulin is a biologic. If you guys ever heard the story about penicillin and how it was discovered by accident, it was like growing off a fungus. That's a biologic. But there are other types of biologics. And in fact, more than half of the top 10 selling drugs in the country, in the world, are actually biologics. The number one selling drug in the United States is an antibody. It's a drug called Humira. It's kind of crazy. Humira actually is used to treat Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome, which is a disease of the stomach, dermatitis, which is a disease of the skin, and arthritis, which is a rheumatoid disease. It's used for all those because they're all autoimmune diseases. And so Humira is an antibody. Now, you probably have heard a lot about antibodies in the past few weeks because of the whole thing with coronavirus. Antibodies are a type of biologic. We have somewhere between 10 to the 11th and 10 to the 12th antibodies in our system. They're the front line of our immune system. They're the things that first notice when there's something bad in the body. And then they alert other things in the body to come along and fight with them. They're not the fighters. They're sort of like the scouts that say, hey, there's the bad guy. So we work on a type of drugs called antibodies. And so antibodies are made up of amino acids. Amino acids are sort of the building blocks of life. There are 20 common amino acids. This is not going to be on the test, by the way. There are 20 common amino acids, and they're represented by letters of the alphabet. Okay? So you're made up of 20 amino acids. All humans are made up of 20 common amino acids. There are more than 20, but there are 20 common amino acids that make up most of life. And they're represented by letters. And so most antibodies start and finish with a very, very common pattern of these amino acids. And so in the case of the ones that we were looking at, the antibodies we were looking at a certain part of that and looked at the very beginning of them, and they started with EVQLV. Those were the letters that were the start of it. Now we're also building evolutionary algorithms. So our algorithms are evolutionary in nature. So I was like, oh crap, we're building evolutionary algorithms, and the first 5 letters of the amino acid sequence of an antibody is EVQLV. So hey, that kind of looks like the word evolve. So that's kind of where that was the first point of our name. And then as we started going down further, and we're like, well, I mean, we're trying to change the way people see pharmaceuticals. So that's sort of why the Q is the way that is. And it's also kind of like startup-y. I'm not sure if any of you guys ever know about the band, the artist deadmau5. His name is written like DEADMAU5. And when I was a DJ, I'm a former DJ, and when his name started coming out, everyone called him Dead Mouse 5. No one called him Dead Mouse. No one knew that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. It's sort of like that. And there's some other reasons. I'm not going to get too far into it, but that gives you a little bit of understanding about what it is that we do. We discover novel biologics using AI. And I say AI because I'm doing this for AI. Because for me, depending on who I'm talking to, if I was talking to you, any of one of you guys, what AI means to us might mean something very different to like my mom, who doesn't understand what I do. And to me, AI is everything from a calculator to deep generative reinforcement learning algorithms, right? And everything in between, because this depends on what you're trying to do and who you're talking to. So I say AI. So we're applying AI to discover and design novel drugs and optimize them as well. And so how do we do that? So there are patterns in evolution. They're hard to decipher. They're basically impossible to decipher by humans. We can try to find ways to patternize evolution. It's complex. But what we've done is we've created an algorithm that tries to understand what is possible from an evolutionary standpoint. Not probable. It's not probability. We're just figuring out what the possibilities are for evolution. Because when you're thinking about, we're doing this sort of like, so evolution's part of a system, right? It's not just the formation of the new thing. It's also the system influences. So you think about like why birds have certain shapes of their beaks or why they have certain shapes of their feet. It has to do with the external pressures. So when we created it, but what we're doing is we're saying, well, what's possible to happen, right? So if I were to say like, what's possible for your children, if you have children, I could look at yourself and your partner, or assuming that you're like making a baby, right? We're not talking, I'm just looking at like a male-female pairing, right? So I could look at your genetic makeup and your partner's genetic makeup and assign possible or probable outcomes for your children. So if you have brown eyes, which I think is a dominant, from my high school genetics, is a dominant trait, and your partner has blue eyes and you have a child, I think there's like a 75% chance your child will have brown eyes and a 25% chance your child will have blue eyes. Assuming that there's like dominant and recessive, right? I'm not a geneticist. I'm just trying to give you guys an example. So what it's saying is these are the possibilities that could happen, right? But like a child could be born blind or with some other challenges, some genetic makeup. So they may have, or there may be some hidden recessive gene that we don't know about. So, or there may be stressors from the environment. Maybe there's something going on in the womb or some product in the environment that affects the genetic makeup. We don't know those. So we just talk about possibilities. And so we figure out what's possible from an evolutionary standpoint. And then we add the stressors of the environment. And what that means is we're building where you have generative algorithms that are based upon hidden Markov models that have some reinforcement learning and Bayesian optimization using undirected graphical models. I just spattered out a bunch of crap in terms of models, and I'm sorry if I just blew your mind on those. I'll repeat them and I'll go slower. We have a generative algorithm, right, that's based upon hidden Markov models and undirected graphical models that takes a reinforcement learning approach using Bayesian optimization. Does anyone need me to repeat that? Because I literally just threw a bunch of crap at you, right? Like a bunch of big words. And if you don't know what the hell those are, I will gladly go into any one of the definitions of what that means. But that's basically how our algorithms generate.
So I want to make sure that I understand this. So, so for like so basically you're looking at like moving from a state to another state, right? That's like the Markov aspect of it. So like each node in your graphical model is some maybe sort of a state that a thing could be in. That would be my first.
Yes, and we're running that hidden Markov model across
Some,
uh, whatever 800 million times 100 is. What's that? 8 billion, 80 billion, 80 billion.
yeah.
That's the 80 billion states. There's 80 billion potential states, and we're running a hidden Markov model across 80 billion potential states.
Mm-hmm. And then the edges are the Bayesian part of it, I'm assuming.
No, the edges are the probability of moving to a new state.
Okay, so that's why it's undirected, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, cool. And then I guess the generative part is...
The whole thing is generative.
Okay.
The whole generative algorithm, as part of it, is the hidden Markov model.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you. That clarifies things for me.
Yeah. And then we take a Bayesian approach to optimize the choices from an evolutionary standpoint. So what that means is, in the Markov model, you're only looking at changes from one state to the next. In the Bayesian approach, we're looking at all changes across all possible states. So we're saying, given the prior state, what is the possible next state, and the next state, and the next state, and the next state? Because as you make a change, right, as you update, that becomes your new prior, and then you update again, that becomes your new prior, then you update again, that becomes your new prior, and so on and so on and so on. But the thing is that you're compounding these changes across. It's very complex, right, in terms of like how computationally complex that Bayesian decision-making has to be. The computer has to make a calculation every single time. And this allows us to generate, in a sort of reinforcement approach, because we take Bayesian and then we do reinforcement. So we're doing explore, exploit. This allows us to generate smartly, in some way, what is possible from an evolutionary standpoint. Now I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to like open up to questions, because I know that was sort of like very heavy. Yeah. Yes. If you want to ask them out loud or type them, whatever you want to do, I'm happy to engage in conversations. So Nyla, you have your, is it Nyla? Did I say that right?
Yes. Yeah. So what specifically are you all looking at when it comes to the evolution? Like, are there certain, is it just a general, like looking at their, like you said, like looking at their parents, or looking at their background and just looking at all the markers, or is there something specific within a person's evolution that you're looking at?
We're looking at actually all the possible evolutionary states that are available. So we're not looking at just specifically antibodies. We're looking at all the rules across all species, across any data that we can pull in that'll give us an understanding of what the state of things are now and what they were. So assuming that you believe, assuming that you believe evolution is true, and that we probably evolved from monkeys, let's just say that that's true, right? That would be considered our prior evolutionary state. Now, you could also look across the diversity of dogs, as an example, to say that each animal represents an evolutionary outcome, and that wolves are the prior evolutionary state. Now, the rule of an animal going from a wolf to a chihuahua, right, which is obviously very different. You know, the fact that a Great Dane and a Chihuahua can make a puppy, it's kind of crazy to me. But the fact of the matter is, there are certain rules that exist that allow it to do that, right? Like, your child will never have blue hair, right? Because there doesn't exist any rules to allow a child to have blue hair. I mean, by birth, you can dye your hair, right? But that's an external force, which I'm going to get into in a second. But I just want to make sure that, did I answer your question?
Yeah, so I understand now, yes.
John, I actually don't know what multiverse theory is, but I would assume it has something to do with like various states of the universe, and that each state is a possible. So maybe, yeah, so it's sort of, I guess it's sort of like multiverse, but assuming that the multiverse is all genetic outcomes, all possible outcomes. So like everybody on this call sort of looks different, but we're all humans. So we're all genetic outcomes and we're all possible states that could exist. And even those people who have what would be considered genetic, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to say defects for the lack of a better word. So, but I apologize if I'm offending anybody. But let's say genetic defects, right? Where like your genetic makeup is sort of like not the norm for humanity, where maybe you are born with blue hair, right? Like, or whatever. Those are still part of they're not defects in our algorithm's perspective. They're possible states. So if we include all possible states, we can now generate variants of existing antibodies, lots of them, because there are lots of states, but we're not doing it randomly. We're doing it based upon the rules of evolution. So we're generating possible states, and lots of them. I mean, just to give you an example, if I were to look at, the antibodies that we work on, the antibodies are made up of like a heavy chain and a light chain. So they sort of look like a Y with two extra parts on the outside. And the inside part is called a heavy chain and the outside part is called a light chain. And we look at them separately. So a heavy chain might have 120 amino acids for one part of its region, but it's actually 450 long. But let's take the 120. So there are 20 possible amino acids. So what that means is if I'm looking at a matrix, my matrix is 120 by 20. I have 2200 or 2400 minus 120 is 2280 possible changes I could make, right? Because it's 2400 minus the ones that they already are. You don't change something to what it is. Now, I want you to think about that, right? Like each time they make a change, that's a possible, that like I can make all the other changes. So now I have basically a 2280 factorial solution set, which is way too fucking big. Sorry. You guys have all heard that word before, sorry. Which is way too big. So what we're doing is we're generating states that are possible changes. So you're doing like 60 or 100 or whatever. And now you've gotten to a more reasonable number. Still 100 factorial is still a big number, but it's more manageable. And I'm gonna explain to you guys in just a minute why we take this approach. But before I do, I just wanna explain, I wanna answer Kuzio's question, which is how do we come up with 80 billion? So the way that we came up with 80 billion is that there's roughly, we train on about 800 million pieces of data. Like our N is 800 million, but the length is about 100. So it's just 800 million times 100, right? I mean, it's the best I can do. The numbers get too big and they don't make much sense. Even 800 million as a number doesn't make much sense, right? This is actually part of this from my behavioral economics standpoint, this is part of the reason why, of my opinion, the statistics that we're seeing from the coronavirus actually seem bigger than what they are. Because when you hear about somebody dying, right, you hear about one person dying, but then you hear about like 10 million people dying, that 1 million person seems more important than the 10 million, right? This is just a fallacy of humanity, of like the way our brains work. That one story matters more than all the people that are dying, right? So if you think about the fact that like 1 million people died of AIDS last year, right? And then like how many people died of the coronavirus this year is like it's small compared to that number, but we don't think about the 1 million people dying of AIDS because it's sort of like that number is just lost on us, right? So, after a certain point, I think it's like 70 or 80, the numbers stop making sense from a usable routine standpoint because we don't use those types of numbers on a regular basis. This has more to do with a behavioral choice. Again, not suggesting we not respond to the coronavirus the way we are, just sort of giving a kind of a perspective about why there's relevance there. So, and so when I say 80 billion, it doesn't make any sense to anybody. Like if I say 10 to the 11th and 10 to the 12th, I don't even know what the hell that means. I just know it's a number that exists, right? Okay, so there are two major ways drug discovery occurs. Yes, Matthew. The input is a known antibody, correct? Today, as of today, as of the current state of our company, which is continually changing, it is based upon current antibodies. Eventually, it will be based upon targets of those antibodies. But once we have the capacity, now that we have the capacity to generate the drugs, yeah, I apologize. My apologies if I didn't make that clear. The way that it works is that we stick a known therapeutic antibody in the system, we evolve it, we create daughters of it, lots and lots of daughters of it, right? My apologies, my bad. We create lots and lots of daughters of it, and then we screen those daughters. We screen them. I use daughters, we could use sons, whatever you want. I just say daughters because, you know, because that's something that's referred to in the, like, science. They call them daughters. Plus, women are better than men. So yeah, so we generate lots and lots and lots of variants. And we're hoping, our assumption is that we'll generate some variants that will either be better than the parent or at least as good. But we're just basing the daughters off the rules of evolution. And then we start to apply the system stressors. So what does that mean? So I'm going to give you an example. I generate an antibody, but how do I know it's going to function well in the human body? Well, I don't necessarily, but I know that there are some problems that could come about if that antibody if it will dissolve between 90 and 108 degrees, right? Why 90 and 108? Well, 98's right in the middle of that. I add a little buffer on both ends in case there's an error, and, you know, people are not exactly 98.6 all the time. So 90 to 108 seems like a good measurement to do. And we've shown that it actually is. And so if the chemical, because the antibody is a chemical, will break down between 90 and 108, which we can figure out to a certain extent computationally, in a method that's called in silico, and I'll remind me to talk about in silico, in vitro, and in vivo in just a second, then we can eliminate those of the millions that we generated that will fail. So think about that as like a GAN, like a generative adversarial network. The generator is one side, and the adversary is the screener that screens out, right? That's the discriminator. I don't really like the word discriminator. It's got too much negative connotation to it, so we call it our screener. We used to call it our discriminator, but then, like, I was talking to scientists, and they were like, "Why are you discriminating?" So I was like, "Okay, well, let's not be discriminatory." So those are the two sides of our algorithm. We sort of are battling with each other all the time. It's like, generate the screen, generate screen. They're not really battling. One's just doing one thing, and the other one's doing the other one. Like, hey, you produce that? Oh, not so good. We can't, like, from the way that it's built right now, it would be far too complex to make it adversarial in nature. So, like, integrating the screener into the generator is something that we're not working on today, and we probably won't. Desmond, to answer your question, these antibodies are what are called in silico generated. So there's in vivo, in vitro, and in silico. I'm going to explain to you what those means. In vitro means testing in a laboratory, in a test tube. In vivo means in an animal. So the way that antibodies are made today, they're generated in vivo for the most part. There's two ways, but let's just talk about the traditional ways. In vivo generation of antibodies. So you think about it like when you get a cold, your antibodies are fighting your cold. So, or you guys have heard that they're trying to harvest the antibodies from people who've had the coronavirus. Those are in vivo generated antibodies, right? Then you test them in the lab. That would be in vitro testing. In silico means generated in a computer. That's what it means. It was coined, I think, in the 80s or something like that. So we're generating computationally the antibodies, and then we move them into the laboratory. And that's where our algorithm, that's where now, it ain't cheap to do that. To test or make one of these antibodies costs anywhere between $1,000 and $4,000. Just one. So when you think about that, you guys are running algorithms all the time. Imagine every time you ran a test, like your train and test, every time you ran a test, each one of those tests costs between $1,000 and $4,000. It's in silico. Here, I'll type it like that. So that's what we are doing with, we're collaborating to actually have them produced. And we're doing that. We were, in January, we were working on oncology and autoimmune disorders. So cancer and like what I talked about Humira does earlier. We quickly shifted our algorithm, our focus onto infectious diseases, specifically coronavirus. It wasn't like a big lift. It required a lot of research into what are the right antibodies, what are the targets. There's before we actually put those things into the space, into the algorithm, we need to have a lot of knowledge about them to make sure that we're making the right choices as our input into our algorithm. And so we're also building some additional technology. We're building predictive models around toxicity, which is a big deal. So I want you guys to think about toxicity like this. I could prevent you from getting the coronavirus, completely prevent you from getting the coronavirus, if I stuck like a tennis ball in your mouth and things like I don't know, something to the ear things into your nose, right? But I'd probably kill you because you wouldn't be able to breathe. That's toxicity, right? It's when the treatment is worse than the disease, right? You make people sick. And you've all seen these side effects whenever these drugs are advertised on television. You're like, holy crap, I never want to take this stuff. There was one that always gets me. It was like one of the, you guys have seen these commercials for some drug. And I remember in my mind, this was my favorite thing, is strange dreams was a potential side effect. And I'm like, aren't all dreams strange? It's how strange are these dreams getting that they consider this a side effect? In any case, so we're going to be working on toxicity. We're going to be looking at function. So currently, when we do our evolutionary algorithms, we're not actually looking at the function of the antibodies. So antibodies have function besides just, right, they do other things. And then we'll be looking at other types of algorithms to help advance. So we're going to be doing computational clinical trial design, because most trial designs currently are frequentist in nature. There's a limited amount of Bayesian application to clinical trial design. Really think that would be the way to make things go a lot faster. The core value of our company, by the way, I should tell you a little bit about the mission of our company. Evolve utilizes AI to accelerate the speed at which healing reaches those in need. I'm going to repeat that, and then I'm going to explain what that means. Evolve uses AI to accelerate the speed at which healing reaches those in need. We happen to be starting with drug discovery, which is the second step of finding drugs. The first step is target discovery. You got to find the target that you need to go after. Think about the coronavirus. The coronavirus is the target. Sometimes we don't know the target in cancer. And in fact, within the coronavirus, there are a bunch of targets. There's the spike protein, the envelope, those sorts of things. So we're talking about that. But when we say accelerating healing to speak those in need, every single person, I can make a prediction right now that I know 100% is going to be true. Every single person in this web conference is going to die at some point. Every single person. So when I say and it's possible that people will get sick. When we say we're trying to accelerate the speed at which healing reaches those in need, we're thinking about the people that are going to get sick. But the thing is that we're also thinking about the people that are around them. Because when you die, you're not going to know you're dead. But all the people that are left to suffer from the grief of your loss are also going to be affected. So when I say the people that are in need, I mean not just the people that we're treating, but the people also that love them. The mother whose child is sick, right? The husband who is ill and the family is suffering. So we're really trying to help those who are in need. That's why we're working so hard. That's why we work 100 hours a week to accelerate the speed at which healing reaches. We just happen to be working at the second part currently, and we're going to continue moving down the value chain of pharmaceuticals and then off of pharmaceuticals and into healthcare itself. Beyond just drugs, because I don't think drugs are just the solution. It just happens to be that like 70% of the time when you go to the doctor, they're giving you a prescription, right? That's a major portion of the healthcare system. They do provide like, do this, or here's therapy or a surgery, but a big portion of it is pharmaceutical. So we really think that we can affect the speed at which healing reaches those in need. That just happens to be the point that we're entering. And that gives you an idea of what our company does. So I'm sort of done giving a spiel about what I'm talking about. I would really love lots and lots of questions. So what I think we could do is, if you guys are interested in asking questions, you can ask me technical questions, you can ask me business questions, you can ask me the meaning of life, you can ask me whatever you want. I know we're doing stuff on the coronavirus. I can talk to you specifically about the science of the coronavirus and the science of how we're applying AI and how other organizations are applying AI, because it's not just being applied in drug discovery. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. If there's a specific area of interest to you that is not within healthcare or medicine, remember, I've been doing this sort of like how you apply AI to these problems. I'm happy to chat about that, but I really want to open this up to let you guys ask as many questions as you want.
Hey,
Sorry.
Andrew.
Hey.
Hey, my name is Ram. I'm a data science student at Flatiron School. Thanks so much for giving us your time. I'm really learning a lot. I was curious to know where you get your where you build your domain knowledge from in particularly, like, sciences.
Yeah, so I read a lot. I probably spend 30 to 40% of my time learning. So I use an app called Feedly. It's an RSS aggregator, and then in that, are you guys familiar with ArcSiv or BioArcSiv? I'm putting it in here. I can have the articles about specific titles. So like I look at antibodies, immunology, biology, stuff like that. I also have on our team, we have a biotechnologist on who has sort of like a broad understanding of life sciences, and just learn as I need to answer questions, and then talking to a lot of people. So in terms of biology, that's where my domain knowledge came in. Just lots and lots and lots of reading. So does that answer your question? I mean, do you want more specifics about what things I'm?
So I was curious to know, so you read a lot from this BioArcSiv, you're saying?
BioArcSiv. So you guys familiar with ArcSiv and BioArcSiv? Okay. So are you familiar with peer-reviewed articles? So like if something goes into a journal, it's peer-reviewed. So BioArcSiv and ArcSiv are preprints of those.
Okay.
And so if I wanted to get, let's say, a Nature article, I got to pay for it. And we're bootstrapped tech company. I'm not paying for it, and I'm not affiliated with a university. Otherwise, I'd be able to get it for free. I do have friends at universities. I can be like, hey, can you send me this article if it's like something I really want to read? But BioArcSiv really keeps me up to date about everything that's going on. And it's not perfect, so I'm not usually basing like conclusions, but it may seed something for my thought, for like my learning. And then also like Wikipedia, right? Great resource. Yeah. But like articles. It could be BioArcSiv I only use because it feeds, it goes into my RSS reader, but I am also reading articles all the time. Like if there's a certain domain problem that we have in our company, I'm usually the person that's researching the technological solution around it. That's part of my what I love doing, and so I take it on as a role. And then our CTO really implements a lot. He's way smarter about me at me than the science. I'm more like if you guys know about the T, right? Like where you have like breadth of knowledge and depth of knowledge. Yeah. I have a really deep top of the T, but not so deep on that. I like to say I'm a wealth of useless information, or that I know enough to get me into trouble, but not to get me out. And those are my sort of like, if I ever go, I usually start those conversations off like that. I'm like, hey, I'm going to start talking about something, and and then get to that point where I'm like, I don't know. And I'm also, I always plead ignorance. So if that's helpful, like, I'm always like, I don't, someone's talking to me about something. I was like, I don't know what that means. And I'll stop them and be like, I don't know what that means. Can you explain that? And they'll stop. I have no ego when it comes to knowledge. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. One more question also. What's your final your product that you're selling?
So we sell the antibodies, like the actual sequences. Mm-hmm. We're not selling our technology. I mean, unless someone wants to buy our company. Anybody got a few $1 billion? But we're selling the antibodies. So like our machine generates something. It like generates a sequence, and then we sell those. We actually, the pharma industry is like has a very interesting model. So it's a lot of times it's collaboration. So we may be selling half of our sequences, right? Meaning like not half of them in terms of number, but like we'll own 50% of it if it makes money.
Got it.
Or when it makes
money. We're generating like thousands of these, no?
We're generating millions, and we're screening down to a few thousand.
How do you screen down? Like, what's the process there?
Oh, so
like test it first?
We screen them based upon how well they'll function in the system. And the way that the one example I gave was like, does it function between 90 and 108 degrees? Does it dissolve between 90 and 108 degrees? That would be one of the screeners. We have like 50 of them, and we keep adding more. I mean, I can go through all the screeners if you want, but it's like very sort of, I'll start going to stuff that you're like, I don't even know what that means, right? Like the pH, that's probably good, right? Like if it doesn't function in the pH of a human body, it's not going to function. You can't inject it into somebody.
Yeah.
Or if it's immunogenic means that the body will recognize it as a foreign object, or it's not manufacturable, right? And we're able to get this information from the sequence and the structural level. So one of the things that we do is we analyze this from a structure standpoint.
Actually, I had a question that kind of ties into that. This is Desmond. When it came to the antigen antibody reaction, how are you measuring the affinity between the antigen and the antibody? Are you doing it from a purely chemical standpoint, or from a chemical conformation, like physical standpoint?
Yeah, so we're doing a structural standpoint. We do structural affinity. This goes back to something I was going to talk about a little bit earlier, and I forgot. Which is to say, most of the companies out there are doing structure-based modeling. And 90% of the companies focus on small molecules. 90% of the companies doing AI for drug discovery are focused on small molecules. We happen to be the part of the 10% that are focused on biologics, which are large molecules. So like this, let's say I'm just going to use this as just a general example. So 20 carbons, 20 hydrogens, 20 nitrogens, so C20, H20, N20, that might be a small molecule. A biologic by an antibody is like C8000, H14000, N20000. So like when you're doing structure, you're looking at the distance between two atoms and the position of those two atoms. That problem's much easily, let's assume that like the calculation in terms of like the distance between the two and the position is, let's just say it's exponential. So each time you add one on, it's exponential in nature. The number is actually more complicated than that, but let's just assume that. So a C20, H20, N20, but from a computational complexity standpoint, might be X to the 20th power times Y to the 20th power times Z to the 20th power. That's somewhat solvable in the computational space, right? But when you get into biologics, you're now getting something that's like X to the 8,000th, Y to the 14,000th, Z to the 20th. And now you're getting into much more challenging from a computational solution space. So we use structure as a filter rather than a chooser, rather than a generator. Does that answer your question, Desmond?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. So let me go back to some of the questions that are being asked in the messaging, and then I'll turn back around to the vocal questions. So Jordan writes, "How did you decide to build your company around healthcare?" Okay. So I got my master's degree at Columbia University. That is not to be like, ooh, I got my master's degree at Columbia University. That is just to show, this is just to give you guys a sequence of events. So as a result of getting that, there's some like bullshit, like notoriety about that, whatever. So I had a lot of opportunities to go and work for the Googles, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Two Sigmas, the Goldman Sachses, the Teslas of the Amazons of the world. But when you think about it, Google gets 90% of its revenue, or at least it did until 92% of its revenue, at least it did when I was looking, from AdWords. So it's an advertising company, as is Facebook, as is Instagram. They're selling more clicks. Now, there's necessity there, right? But to me, I didn't really feel like I would be fulfilling my personal mission, which is to help people by going to sell clicks. I just felt like it wasn't for me. So I didn't want to go over. In the finance world, when I was looking at Two Sigma and Goldman Sachs, I was not interested in making rich people richer. That just didn't appeal to me. And then when you look at, let's say, like Tesla and Amazon, so a portion of Amazon, so let's take the 25% of Amazon that's AWS, let's eliminate that. And you can look at the other 75%, let's assume that's the 100%. 50% of that is the advertising part, right? Like the website. I'm not sure if you guys know this. Amazon pushes out a new website every 11 seconds. So every 11 seconds, a new version of Amazon is being seen. It's all about getting more people, and they're like making very minute changes. They might be moving a button, a pixel over to the left or a pixel over to the right. They might be changing color. They're constantly running A/B tests. So that's one part of it where they're doing that. The other part is the automation part, right? The warehouse optimization, the movement of trucks, all that stuff. That to me is sort of the other part, which is sort of automation, or sort of, you think about like self-driving cars and self-operating warehouses and these self-flying drones. That was really cool to me, but it didn't feel as impactful as I wanted to be. I wanted to have as much impact as possible. Now, at the time when I was looking, only 1% to 2% of all data scientists were in healthcare and pharmaceuticals. That's both industries, right? So it's just like 2% of data scientists are actually in the healing space. And so when my partners, there were 4 of us when we started, there's now 2 of us. The other 2 left because they were immigrants and they needed H-1Bs, and our young company couldn't offer that. I'm still really, really amazing friends. They're like really good friends. So they left because of some stupid regulatory reason, not because, right? So we all decided that we wanted to do AI for healthcare. We didn't know what we wanted to do. We just knew we wanted to do it. So we did a bunch of consulting in that space and learned a bunch of stuff. And actually, have you guys ever done like root cause analysis? Ever doing like the AI stuff and you're like, why do you just keep asking why, and then you get down to like the reason that it's like that, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, so that root cause in healthcare is always because healthcare is fucked up. Like in general, that is always the root cause. It's just really like, you go like, why are drugs so expensive? Like I can just keep going down the list, and eventually the conclusion is it's just the healthcare system screwed up, right? And so part of the thing was, how can we use technology to improve that space? And so we're building a technology company that does pharma currently, and eventually we're building a technology company that does healthcare. But the problem is when you're trying to do technology in the healthcare space, the big roadblock is the healthcare industry. So we're going from another direction, is saying, hey, can we come from the bottom up? And so that's sort of. Okay, curious on our opinions on the path you think the coronavirus is going to take and what your research has found in terms of curing it to this point. Yes, okay. I'm not exactly sure what you mean, accusio. I really feel like I'm accusio.
It's pretty close.
Accusio or accusio?
Yeah, accusio.
Accusio, okay, yeah. Sorry. what did you mean by the path that I think the coronavirus is going to take?
There's so much information there about where this is exactly going to go, how many people are going to die, how long people are going to be sheltered in place. Like, just based on what the media is telling us and based on your research, where do you feel realistically this is going to go in terms of, people being forced to stay inside, or number of deaths, number of people, put in ICUs, having to use ventilators, stuff like that? Just kind of a general overview of where you think this is going to go.
Okay. First of all, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't really answer the question about like how many people are going to go. But let's assume that the number is like, I always try to think of best case, worst case scenario. So like worst case scenario, the entire population of the world gets the coronavirus and 5% of the population dies. So we lose 400 million people on the planet. Best case scenario, and the healthcare system just literally crashes. Nobody can get healed. That's why the whole flattening the curve thing is a big deal, because they have that line where you're trying to remain at below a point where the healthcare system can handle it. There is a lot of research out there that's showing that if you got the coronavirus, you cannot get it again. There was one person in China who got it twice. There was research that was done that they infected macaque monkeys, which are a good model for human systems, and they tried to reinfect those macaque monkeys and they could not. So in the sense of that end, I do think that like we're doing a good job in sort of trying to reduce the amount of people that are out. The challenge that's coming about, and this is my personal opinion, so please take it with a grain of salt. The challenge that's coming about is that almost all the university labs in the world have shut down, except if they're doing coronavirus research. 40 to 50, and it's approaching 60% of clinical trials are stopping. The vast majority of you are not probably going to the doctor, even if you have some sort of health issue that you might be addressing. I myself need to go to the doctor to go get something addressed, but I'm not going. So while the short-term direct realization of the coronavirus is saying, hey, we need to keep people indoors to save their lives, we are not looking at the potentially longer-term impact this could have on the health of people. If you add into account the amount of stress that's being caused right now, the amount of diseases that are not being getting like checked on right now, and the amount of research that's being stopped to help cure or treat some of the diseases that exist right now, the indirect effect on death may actually be higher than the direct number of lives that we're saving. The problem is, how do you quantify the indirect? Because you can really easily quantify the direct. So I have concerns on the fact that we're like going back to the idea of toxicity, the cure may be worse than the disease. And when you have people that are having a narrow focus on just saying, hey, we only need to look at the coronavirus as the problem, as opposed to looking at the overall challenge, that's my concern. Now, the best answer to the question that you've asked that I have seen to date is an interview that Trevor Noah did earlier this week with Bill Gates. I actually think that's okay, so just to give you an understanding of Bill Gates's foundation, the Gates Foundation, spends a lot of money on infectious diseases, does a lot of research on infectious diseases. Bill Gates has been advocating that we're going to have a coronavirus outbreak. He's invested billions of dollars, millions of dollars into this space, and he has the ear of all the people that are really working hard on the coronavirus. So the best answer that I've heard so far in terms of understanding what is going on would be watch that. I'm not a proponent of Trevor Noah or Bill Gates. I just think that to me, it's the answers that should be coming out of leadership. Regardless of what your opinion is of Trump, whether you're pro or against Trump, I think that there needs to be sort of like a consistent message from the leadership. And I think that would be that was Gates acting in the most sort of presidential way in terms of providing insights into what's coming, what the pain is, and things like that. So, and then you asked also about what the research has found in terms of curing at this point. Well, there's a question is, what does cure mean? Does cure mean nobody gets it? Does cure mean that we treat it and we can save lives? Maybe not everybody. Does cure mean that we know when people have it? Vaccines are going to be the only way we're going to be able to stop it. The challenge is the coronavirus is still mutating. And so any vaccine that we create may not be good for depending on the way it's made and what type of, what method it's used, it may not be able to treat the next versions of the coronavirus. In terms of a cure, you're talking about therapies. That's actually what we're working on. So we're not trying to prevent people from getting it. We're trying to treat people who do have it. And we're also working on drugs that are cross-reactive, meaning that that drug could have been used against SARS-1, against MERS, or against the current SARS, and the next coronavirus that acts in a similar way will be able to use to treat that. So I hope I answered your question.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah. John, you're basically selling hot leads in pharma industry. Correct. We are, they're called, so there are what's called hits and leads. We're generating smart hits. We're generating hits that don't just take into account the current state and then also potential future states, which is to say, will they, so there's a 90 to 95% failure rate in pharma. It's part of the reason drugs are so expensive, is because there's a huge amount of failure rate. Our algorithms are designed to reduce the likelihood of failure, not increase the likelihood of success. And so the way that we generate our candidates is to say, we're just trying to reduce the failure rate. So hopefully that, John, that answered your question. Jordan, thank you for your feedback. The cost of gathering the data, what I was actually, I'm sorry, Sam, if I came across the same cost of gathering your data. It's the cost of gathering the validation that is, right? And so if you think about like validation, a single, like if you're running an algorithm and you're doing a training, let's say you're training it on 2,500, your N is 2,500, right? And you train it on 2,499 and you only do one test, that value is not big enough. That's why it's so expensive, right? For us to actually get validation. So if you imagine it costs, let's just say for the sake of discussion, it's $1,000. So each one of those tests that we're running is $1,000. So you think about that, like we're doing all this training and then we need to spend money on the testing portion. And so that marginal gain is not that it's rarely successful. What we're trying to do is take the test values and do it in a distributed way so that we're able to validate as much of the algorithm as possible with each test that we do. So for example, let's go back to the thermostability, which is saying looking between 90 and 108 degrees. We're gonna test across the spectrum of the antibodies, saying that there's a distribution of those that are within 90 to 108 of the ones that we generated, right? Some sort of distribution. We're gonna try to test across that distribution for each one that we generate. So like, maybe there's, let's say that we're testing 2,000, we're gonna sample from that. Thanks, Hector. Appreciate that, brother. Sam, I hope I answered your question, but if I didn't, please unmute yourself and
yeah, that definitely answered my question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you got everything that I was trying to ask you out of that.
Okay, cool. Hey, Matrani. Sorry.
It's Alex. Hi.
Alex. So I was doing a Fonzie thing. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I like that.
You spoke with a company and they mentioned additional courses like algebra, calculus, to strengthen application courses did you take prepare for the master's in your DS career, and where did you take them? I did my undergrad. So I took a non-traditional route. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree until I was 38. And then I went directly into a master's degree. I know you're all like, ooh, he's older than 38. I thought he was 20 something. Cool, Jim. So I took undergrad. So where I took them was at Columbia as an undergrad. And I took Calc 1, 2, 3, and 4. Or no, I'm sorry, Calc 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, not Calc. I took Intro to Statistics, which I did really badly at. And if I took it again, I'd probably do way better at it. I just didn't understand what the hell they were trying to teach me. And now that I understand what they were trying to teach me, I can go back and be like, oh, that's what they were trying to teach me. Because just like statistics is very poorly taught in general. Like it's very like I'm more, for me in general, I'm more of like teach me by examples that really matter. Like what the hell do I care if something on a manufacturing line is going to fail? What the hell does that matter to me, right? Like I need stuff that's more applicable to me. So that's probably why I did that. Like, plus maybe I'm just dumb. I took computational linear algebra, which was like linear algebra. I took intro to computer programming because it was a prerequisite, even though I generally knew how to code. But I knew how to code, but I didn't know algorithms. And that was important. I think that's really important to understand how algorithms work. And then that was what I really got out of that class. And then I took computational linear algebra, which was probably one of the best classes I had ever taken from a data science perspective, and the usefulness of that in my undergrad. In my graduate degrees, like there was just so much good stuff. So that I took all of those. I think what also would really strengthen my application was like what I was doing at Columbia as an undergrad. Like what I did, not just what I knew. And I think that could help strengthen your application as well, right? Like, what are you doing with the knowledge that you have? How are you applying it? Talking to, like, trying to reach out to some of those students who applied and got in and are either alums of it or students now, asking what their journey was. And they really try to do a good job of creating diversity in there. I mean, there were a lot of people who had statistics undergrads and computer science undergrads, but there were people who had like politics and economics and I remember who was it? Like there was somebody who had like a philosophy undergrad, physics, right? So like they don't want to make it so that everybody's homogenous. And so so hopefully that's helpful.
It is. They just, they were outlining how the program changed in the 4 years that it existed, and the applicant pool has completely changed every single year. So that's how they mentioned it. And when I brought up that I was in a boot camp, they said that gives you a broad overview, but you need to beef up by taking additional courses. So I just wanted to gain your perspective before either advancing in that direction as I look for roles now.
Yeah. A lot of companies that are hiring data scientists don't necessarily need you to have the pedigree. If you're going to Columbia and you're going to spend the kind of money that you're going to spend on it, and it ain't cheap, believe you me, it ain't cheap. I'm still paying for it. Well, actually, not right now. Thank you, CARES Act. But yeah. Really have a good reason for going, because you can learn a lot of the stuff that you're going to learn in a school environment, especially if you really have the people as part of the program who are like going through the trenches with you. If you're trying to learn alone, it becomes much harder. So really trying to create that community of data scientists and being part of it and giving as much as you're getting.
Certainly. Thank you.
No problem. More questions? I'm going to take these sort of like open mic questions. If anybody has them, you're welcome to unmute and ask me. Or if not.
Yeah, we have to start wrapping up soon, unfortunately.
All right, so let me take one more.
Go for it.
Quick question.
I wanted to ask something.
Yeah, just on your deliverables to these companies, you're basically selling antibodies, the sequences of antibodies, and whether or not they're manufacturable, whether or not they'll attach to that virus in a certain way. And you're giving them the sequences, and it's their job to see if they can test them against the virus in any particular way.
Yep.
And I guess that would apply to any medical application. So the Humira example, the Humira antibody is working on some particular part of the body, and you would test whether or not it would attach or it would remain manufacturable and all that.
Correct.
That's what you're getting. So your feedstock is an existing antibody where you pull from research?
Something like that. I mean, we use multiple approaches to start with a sequence. We we're using, there's multiple approaches we use. In some cases, it's existing ones. In some cases, we're doing de novo, which means we're taking pieces of different antibodies. Sometimes we're just looking at parts of it. It's a biology problem, less of a data science problem. So the input requires quite a bit of research and domain knowledge to actually make that input matter. But yes, from a very broad standpoint, we're taking existing therapeutics and making daughters of them and then screening the daughters. But eventually we'll move away from that and move from a target perspective, because that's the sort of step before, right? Imagine we didn't know the coronavirus was what was killing people. How would we know what is the target in the body? In this case, the target is the coronavirus, right? So now you know the target, but then you have to do way more research into it. Like, what part of the coronavirus is the target, right? You need to know a lot about the metabolism, the biology, the system, the transcriptomics, the genomics, there's a whole bunch of information that we need to understand to be able to smartly make decisions about what our input is into the algorithm.
It's crazy because my brother's actually a coronavirus researcher before this. So he was talking about MERS and SARS to me about this for years. And I was like, oh. And then it came up, I was like, oh no. My brother was talking about this.
I'd love to chat with him.
Yeah, I can send you his information. He's at UTMB in Texas, in Galveston. He's at the medical colleges there.
All my exes live in Texas.
Oh no.
No, it's a song.
I know.
Good one.
I know. I can send you information.
I think you have my LinkedIn information. Everyone should have
I
my.
can definitely send you that.
Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Welcome to ask me any questions. If anybody has more, feel like they didn't want to ask a question or wants to ask me more, I'm happy to schedule a little bit of time with you guys. I mean, as you can imagine, I'm working tirelessly. I'm not sure if some of you guys who came on earlier, but that's my to-do list, and it keeps growing. So.
Andrew, thank you so much for giving us so much time in your schedule. I wish we could stay on longer. Unfortunately, I have to get to a meeting and I have to quit the recording here in a little bit. But yeah, connect, ask questions. I sent Andrew, did not know him, sent him a random LinkedIn message, and we connected immediately. We hopped on a call, and so I just want to say thank you for that as well. And this is
Thanks for having me. This is great. I really enjoyed it. I love giving back to the community as much as I can, and there should be more data scientists working on real big problems. I mean, I think there's a great guy who says it's a shame that that some of the smartest people on the planet are just trying to sell more clicks, which, not to disparage those individuals, but I think if we can get more data scientists really, in fact, impacting healthcare, the world will become a better place and people will be in better conditions. So, 100%. And there are a lot of different ways to apply AI to the healthcare space. So many different ways. We just have to be doing one of them.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for attending. Andrew, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording and